Thank you very much, Mr Deputy President. I have read Minister Pavey's second reading speech for the Water Supply Critical Needs Bill 2019 and completely agree with the Minister's opening statement. Quote, New South Wales is currently experiencing unprecedented drought conditions. About 98% of the state is affected and forecasts indicate that hot and dry conditions are expected to extend through summer. Major regional centres such as Tamworth, Dubbo, Orange and Bathurst have less than 12 months of town water supply. An increasing number of regional towns are facing even greater difficulties, with indications that Cobar, Tenterfield, Nyngan and Burke have less than 6 months of own water supply." Unquote. After this point, there is little, if anything, that I agree with in the Minister's proposed solutions to this crisis. I certainly acknowledge and support the critical importance of ensuring that potable water supplies are deliverable to people living in our rural townships and communities. However, water must not be taken from environmental flow and allocations. Our rivers and the plants and animals that rely on them are already in desperate straits. The environmental crisis is every bit as real as the impact of the drought on people and agricultural industries. Humanity cannot survive if the environment does not thrive. It is a false dichotomy to say that there must be a choice taken between supplying the townships and keeping the river flowing. Where is the water going to come from to fill these dams? Certainly not rain. Nor do I accept that the building more dams is somehow going to produce a drop of extra water for the competing interests of industry, residents and the environment. To believe otherwise is either a product of magical thinking or a cynical calculation that building more dams will meet with the approval of the Daily Telegraph and the shock jocks of Radio 2GB. Thank you. In her speech, the Minister also gives her government credit for pouring money into drought relief, citing more than $1.8 billion since 2015. I would argue that the time has come to stop propping up agricultural practices that are not sustainable. It is actually cruel to extend loans to producers that are suffering from the permanent effects of climate change, and it is not a wise spend of taxpayers' dollars. There is surely no doubt now that New South Wales has become hotter and drier. We need to deal with and plan for the new normal. This does not mean constructing new and extending existing dams. We are seeing the consequences of bad government policy. Farmers are going broke because they cannot service the loans and they have been encouraged to take out. They cannot service their loans because their animals and crops are not viable in ongoing drought conditions. Entire herds, including breeding animals, are being sent to slaughter. Many agricultural producers are unable to pay for the increased costs of irrigation. There is more money to be made from on-selling irrigation licences than there is in traditional farming. At what point will the government accept that water-hungry industries like dairying, cotton and rice growing can longer be justified in areas reliant upon the Murray-Darling River system? The AJP is implacably opposed to this bill, particularly as it stands now, but we will review this position depending on how the amendments, particularly that will be brought by Mr Justin Field, find passage through this House. The bill, which sets up the framework for the upgrade of the Wyangala Dam and in the Central West and the proposed new Dungowan Dam near Tamworth and a dam on the Mole River, making them, quote, state-significant infrastructures for the purpose of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The Minister notes that we have not built any new dams in New South Wales in the last 30 years, and there is a good reason for that. Her department's own bureaucrats accepted expert evidence many years ago that new dams are not a solution to water shortages. As the CEO, Chris Gambian of the Nature Conservation Council, stated, governments stopped building dams 30 years ago for a very good reason. Dams fail to provide water security for local communities. They degrade river systems and cause a host of environmental problems. Richard Kingsforth, the Professor of Environmental Science and Director of the Centre of Ecosystem Science at the University of New South Wales, stated that superficially easy way and response to drought is to sort out the environment drought and drought-proof it. That's code for building more dams and more water out of rivers, often already reduced to a trickle. More dams don't make more water. It is easy to think of the environment as a magic pudding and develop more out of our natural resources instead of doing better with what we have developed. Many politicians jump straight to developing more supply instead of improved management of demand, including production efficiencies on the farm. Removing trees to build a dam actually reduces the likelihood of increased waterfall. As stated of the department's own webpage, quote, trees access water deep in the ground and hold the moisture in their canopies. They absorb sunlight and emit heat, which creates thermal currents that take the moisture from the leaves up into the atmosphere, where it condenses as rain. Quote, unquote. So I suggest that the Minister would be better off protecting and expanding our existing forests than promoting dams which cause environmental damage. The National Party has shown time and time again that they do not have a slight grasp on the basic science of water management. Federal Nationals leader Michael McCormack recently praised the Bradfield scheme, an 80-year-old pipe dream to divert northern river flows inland. It has been so thoroughly debunked that one has to question whether the party has anyone capable of representing the interests of rural people as they negotiate drier, hotter future. Minister Pavey is promising hundreds of millions of dollars to expend on dams, with more promised by the federal government. And that is on top of the $1.8 million that, on drought relief for farmers. Are the taxpayers getting the best value for the money? I would argue most defiantly not. Instead, I propose we get smarter with our money and water resources. A case in point is the Chaffey Dam near Tamworth, which was at 95% capacity in late 2016. 3 years later, and most of the water is gone. Where has it gone? Tamworth councillor Mark Rodder's motion was defeated when he called upon the council to ask the Minister Pavey that same question. The population of Tamworth is not so great that it could in any way empty a dam, and there is no environmental flow from the dam. So that leaves agricultural industries as the likely recipients. It just so happens that Tamworth has a thriving intensive poultry industry where millions of birds are bred each year for their eggs and meat. Dams are attractive to industry. They are a public asset paid for by taxpayers, but industry can draw the water at reasonable cost. Like highways, construction of new roads leads quickly to more congestion as more cars venture out on these new roads. So it is with dams. It encourages industry to increase production until existing resources is once again depleted, and the towns don't have the water to hydrate their population. We need to go back to the drawing board and firstly acknowledge that climate change is real and it is impacting on New South Wales weather and water. We need to take a hard look at agriculture production in New South Wales. Where and what kind of farming is sustainable, given the new normal, lower rainfall and higher temperatures? I propose that we use the money allocated for drought relief and dam building be used as follows. Firstly, assess which farms are no longer viable and buy out the landholders, rewilding that land for native vegetation, forests and animal habitat. Secondly, thirsty industries such as dairying, cotton and rice should be phased out of production along the Murray-Darling Basin. Research should be undertaken to invest in new, more sustainable crops. Thirdly, caps should be placed on the water drawn down the intensive animal agriculture facilities so that the highway effect, quote unquote, does not result in a spiral of ever-increasing demands for water. We should stop expecting the market to solve our water problems. Water is an essential ingredient of our life, all life. It should not be traded by corporations on the stock market. Finally, we should acknowledge the wisdom of our First Peoples, who have a deep understanding of the connectedness between the rivers and waterway and the health and well-being of humans, animals and the land. In the word of Rhonda Ashby, born and raised on the banks of the Barwon River, now teacher of the Gamilaroi language in the local school, quote, "The river has a responsibility not just to us, but to plants and animals. It has a right to connect up with the other waterways. It's the bloodline of this country. It's like us. If our blood stops flowing, we get sick. The water, if that flow stops, we all become sick."